An emotional story of redemption, love, passion, and new beginnings. He humiliated her in front of everyone, laughed at her poverty as if it were a joke. But what he didn't know was that someone was watching it all in silence, with a broken heart. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by it. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The bathroom mirror at the school reflected a woman who barely recognized herself. Hannah adjusted the navy blue dress for the third time, smoothed her hair in a simple bun, and took a deep breath. The fabric was beautiful, but she knew it wasn't hers. Mrs. Martinez, the seamstress next door, had insisted on lending it to her, along with the silent alterations that transformed that party dress into something that would fit both her body and her teacher's budget. The medium-heeled black shoes creaked slightly when she walked. They were from a thrift store downtown, still carrying the history of another woman, other parties, other dreams. But tonight, they were hers. Hannah looked at her own hands. There were no expensive rings, just a simple wedding band that had belonged to her grandmother. No manicured nail polish, just short, clean nails of someone who works with chalk and books every day. But her heart was whole, and that's what mattered. The Words That Liberate project had changed the lives of 43 homeless teenagers. Over the past 2 years, Hannah coordinated literacy classes every Thursday night after a full day teaching literature at Ashton Taylor Public School in the Spring Gardens neighborhood. It was a place where asphalt gave way to mud when it rained, where houses were stacked in vibrant colors to disguise the hardness of life, where she had been born and raised, and where she returned every day with the certainty that she was making a difference. The Donovan Foundation had chosen her project to receive the Transformative Education Award that year. Along with the recognition came a ceremony at the Grand Plaza Hotel in New York City, and she needed to be there, not out of vanity, but because that prize money meant another year of operation, more transformed lives, more teenagers discovering they could read much more than words. The bus ride from Chicago to New York had been an eternity of anxiety. Hannah had never been to the Grand Plaza Hotel. In fact, she had never been to any hotel. The reservation had been made by the foundation itself, courtesy of the organization, according to the formal email she had received. The room was small, but to her it seemed like a palace. Soft towels, lavender-scented sheets, ocean view. She had spent a whole hour just looking out the window, trying to believe she was really there. Now, descending in the elevator toward the event hall, she felt her stomach turning. The place was filled with people who seemed to have been born in that environment. Women in long dresses that cost more than her annual salary, men in tailored suits who talked about investments and international trips as casually as discussing the weather. The air was heavy with expensive perfumes and high expectations. Hannah walked slowly, trying to appear natural, though each step made her feel like an intruder. Waiters circulated with silver trays loaded with canapes she couldn't pronounce, and champagne flutes that bubbled like effervescent promises. She accepted a glass, more to have something to hold on to than out of a desire to drink. "You must be the honored teacher." The voice came from behind, deep and engaging. Hannah turned and found herself facing a tall, dark-haired man with dark eyes that seemed to know all the world's secrets. His suit was impeccable, custom-tailored, and he wore it like a second skin. Perfectly styled hair, professionally shaved beard, a smile that had won hearts and destroyed dreams without leaving traces. "Michael Donovan," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you in person." The surname echoed in Hannah's mind like distant thunder. Donovan, the man behind the foundation, the heir to one of the country's largest fortunes, someone whose name appeared in the society pages of newspapers as frequently as in the business sections. She shook his hand, feeling the soft skin of someone who had never worked a single day with his own hands. "Hannah Sullivan," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's a pleasure." "How brave you are," he said, looking her up and down, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "to wear something so authentic in such a demanding place." She didn't immediately understand if it was a compliment or a cutting observation. Michael continued talking, quoting Emily Dickinson, asking about Walt Whitman, connecting through literature as if they were equals. For a moment, Hannah allowed herself to believe she had found someone who truly understood her work, her passion, her mission. "It must be fascinating," he continued, moving closer, "teaching literature to those who have never had access to the classics. It's almost like translating beauty into a simpler language, isn't it?" Something in his tone began to bother her, but Hannah couldn't identify what. He spoke about her students as if they were interesting scientific projects, about her work as if it were curious charity, about her as if she were a rare species on display. "Tell me," he said, leaning against the wall next to her, "where do you live? Where did you study? It must be difficult to maintain a social project on a public school teacher's salary, I imagine." Each question came disguised as interest, but Hannah began to feel she was being dissected. He praised her spontaneity, admired her authenticity, celebrated how she was naturally outside the standards. Each adjective sounded like a fence being built around her, defining her, limiting her, transforming her into something picturesque and safe. The hall filled up, businessmen, socialites, politicians, artists, people who moved in that environment, like fish in water, who laughed at the right jokes, who greeted the important people, who knew exactly what clothes to wear, which wine to choose, which opinion to express. Hannah observed everything, like someone watching a play whose script she didn't know. That's when she saw Ryan. He was in the corner of the room, wearing a simple dark suit, hair tied in a low ponytail, trying to go unnoticed among the waiters and production assistants, but she recognized him immediately. The same angular face, the same light eyes that held old stories, the same large hands she remembered holding when they were children running through the neighborhood. Ryan Matthews, the son of Mr. Frank, the gardener who took care of the gardens at the Donovan mansion when she was a teenager. They had grown up together, sharing summer afternoons, flying kites on the rooftop, making up stories as they walked to school. He was 2 years older, protective like an older brother, dreamy like a still young poet. But at 16 he had left. His mother, Mrs. Connie, had fallen ill, and Ryan needed to work to pay for her treatment. His father had disappeared years before, leaving only bills and broken promises. Ryan dropped out of school, became a construction worker, then became interested in restoring sacred art, a passion he discovered by chance when helping renovate the neighborhood church. Hannah hadn't seen him in more than 10 years. Now he was there in the same hall working. The irony of fate was cutting. The boy who played in the gardens of the Donovan mansion had returned to work at the family's foundation, coordinating the sacred art wing that had been recently inaugurated. He hadn't seen her yet, focused as he was on the technical details of the event. "Attention, please," Michael's voice echoed through the hall via a microphone. "I'd like to make a special toast." Hannah felt her stomach contract. Michael called her to the small improvised stage in the center of the hall, and she went up, trying to control the trembling in her legs. All conversation ceased. All attention turned to her. Hundreds of curious, judging, condescending eyes. "Tonight," Michael began, holding the microphone with the naturalness of someone born speaking in public, "we honor a woman of exceptional courage. Hannah Sullivan teaches us that sometimes it takes very little to do a lot. her moving simplicity, her courage to be among us despite her evident limitations, reminds us that education can flourish in the most unlikely places. The hall was in absolute silence. Hannah felt each word like a velvet-wrapped slap, because, Michael continued, smiling that cold smile, sometimes it's in the mud that the most honest flower blooms. For a second that seemed like an eternity, the silence was total. Then came contained laughter, polite applause, approving murmurs. Hannah felt the floor dissolving beneath her feet. Each word of the speech echoed in her mind like a sentence: moving simplicity, evident limitations, mud. She left the stage on autopilot, accepted mechanical congratulations, smiled when they expected her to smile, thanked when they expected her to thank. But inside, something had shattered. It wasn't recognition she had received, it was humiliation disguised as benevolence. Ryan had seen everything. He stood in the corner of the hall, fists clenched, jaw locked, watching that farce with a mixture of anger and helplessness that burned inside. He had known Michael since childhood, knew of his cruel nature, of his pleasure in humiliating those he considered inferior. But seeing Hannah in that situation, so far from home, so vulnerable, awakened in him something he had tried to bury years ago. The rest of the night passed in slow motion. Hannah tried to behave normally, but she felt every glance, every whispered comment, every fake smile like small and constant stabs. When she finally managed to say goodbye and go up to her room, she let the borrowed dress fall to the floor and cried until she had no more tears. 3 days later, back in Chicago, she tried to resume her routine. But something had changed. Michael's words constantly echoed in her mind. Evident limitations, mud, moving simplicity. She looked in the mirror and saw exactly that. Limitations, simplicity, someone out of place. That's when she received the first message. "Hi, Han, it's Ryan. I got your number from Mrs. Martinez. Can we talk?" She looked at the phone for several minutes before answering. The nickname that only he used, the memory of a time when she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. "Sure, whenever you want. Today, if possible. I know a place that makes the best sugar bread in town. You still like sweets?" For the first time in days, Hannah smiled, a small, shy smile, but a genuine one. Ryan remembered. After all these years, he still remembered her favorite sweet. The afternoons they spent at Mr. Joseph's bakery, the small details that make a person unique. "I still do," she typed. "Shall we meet at 5? The answer came immediately. "I'll be waiting." "And Han, you haven't changed at all. You're still the same brave girl you always were." Hannah looked at the message and felt something warm in her chest. Maybe she didn't need to recognize herself in Michael Donovan's cruel eyes. Maybe she could find herself again in the kind eyes of someone who truly knew her before the world tried to define her. Mr. Joseph's bakery had changed owners 3 times since their adolescence, but the smell remained the same, a mixture of fresh yeast, cinnamon, and sugar that immediately transported Hannah back to when she was 15. She arrived a few minutes before 5, nervous as a teenager on a first date, not knowing quite what to expect from this reunion. Ryan was already there, sitting at the same blue Formica table where they used to share dreams and sugar bread too, decades ago. He had exchanged the event suit for a white cotton shirt and worn jeans. His hair was loose now, falling in dark waves to his shoulders, and there was a stubble that made him seem more approachable, more human, more real than a man she had met in recent years. When he saw her approaching, he stood up with a smile that reached his eyes. There was nothing rehearsed there, nothing calculated. It was just Ryan, the same boy who had once promised that when they grew up, he would build a house for her with his own hands. "Han," he said, and his voice carried a tenderness she had forgotten existed. She sat across from him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. There were so many years between them, so many untold stories, so many unanswered questions. But there was also an instant familiarity, as if time hadn't passed, as if they were again two children sharing secrets on any ordinary afternoon. "You haven't changed at all," Ryan said, and there was absolute truth in his voice. "You still have that way of furrowing your brow when you're thinking." Hannah laughed, a small and nervous laugh. It had been days since she had truly laughed. "Neither have you," she lied, because Ryan had changed a lot. His shoulders were broader. Now, his hands had calluses from honest work. There were small wrinkles around his eyes that spoke of smiles and worries. But the essence was the same. The kindness was still there, intact. The bakery owner, an Arab gentleman named Habib, brought 2 sugar breads without them having to order. Ryan must have called ahead. The simple but thoughtful gesture touched Hannah in a way she hadn't expected. "How did you know I was at that party?" she asked, nibbling the sweet that tasted like childhood. Ryan smiled, a crooked smile she remembered well. "I've been working at the foundation for 3 years. I coordinate the restoration of the Sacred Art Wing. When I saw your name on the honorary list, I couldn't believe it. Hannah Sullivan, teacher, social project. It had to be you." "You work for him," she said, and it wasn't a question. There was a bitterness in her voice that she couldn't hide. "I work for the foundation," Ryan corrected carefully. "Michael Donovan signs the checks, but my work is with art, with history, with beauty. It's different." They were silent for a moment. Hannah played with the sugar on the bread, remembering Michael's words, the humiliation, the feeling of being exposed like an exotic animal at a fair. "I saw everything," Ryan said softly. His speech, the faces of the people, how you felt. "I wanted to go up on that stage and break his face." The confession came loaded with contained anger that surprised Hannah. Ryan had always been protective, but never violent. Seeing him like this, willing to fight for her, awakened something in her chest that she had tried not to feel. "Why didn't you?" she asked, half joking, half serious. "Because you didn't need me to do it. You were beautiful on that stage, even with him trying to diminish you. You were whole. And that, Han, that's something men like Michael Donovan will never be able to touch." Ryan's words fell on her like a balm. For the first time since the party, she felt that maybe she wasn't the problem. Maybe it was Michael, with his cruelty disguised as elegance, with his sick need to feel superior by diminishing others. "Tell me," Ryan said, changing the subject with the delicacy of someone who knows others' limits. "Tell me about the project, about your students, about everything you've built." And she told him. She talked about the 43 teenagers who had learned to read in her classes, about Charlie, who discovered he had a talent for poetry and now wrote verses, about Amanda, who used literacy to get her first job, about Junior, who went back to school after learning he wasn't stupid, he just never had a real chance. Ryan listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he really cared, celebrating each small victory as if it were his own too. There was no condescension there, no exaggerated surprise or empty compliments. There was genuine recognition, real admiration, sincere pride. "Remember when we were kids," he said, when she finished telling him about the project. "And you said you wanted to teach the whole world to read?" Hannah smiled, an old and sweet memory emerging from the past. "You said it was impossible, that the world was too big." "I was wrong," Ryan said, looking directly into her eyes. "You are teaching the world to read, one boy at a time, one girl at a time. That's how you change the world, Han. Not with beautiful speeches in fancy halls, but with real work, real love, real people." They talked until the bakery closed. Ryan told her about the years he spent away, about how he worked in construction, until he discovered by chance his talent for restoration. about how he learned on his own, studying in libraries, observing master craftsmen, developing a special sensitivity for sacred art, about how his mother had recovered, but his father never returned, and how he had made peace with that absence. "And you?" he asked as they walked through the neighborhood streets. "Married, boyfriend, husband?" Hannah laughed, a slightly bitter sound. "I dated a few times, but there was always something wrong. They either wanted to change me or wanted to save me, or couldn't understand why I chose to stay here, working with who I work with, earning what I earn." "And why did you choose to stay?" The question was simple, but the answer was complex. Hannah stopped walking and looked around. The colorful houses, the children playing in the street, the women talking at doorways, the men returning from work. This is where she belonged. This is where she made sense. "Because this is where I know who I am," she said. "Because when I leave here, the whole world seems to conspire to tell me that I'm not good enough, that I don't deserve, that I'm in the wrong place. But here, I know I have value. Here, my work matters. Here, I matter." Ryan nodded, understanding. Perfectly. He had returned too, not to the neighborhood, but close to it. He now lived in a small apartment downtown, but visited Mrs. Martinez every week, had lunch with old neighbors, kept his roots alive. When they reached the door of Hannah's house, he hesitated. "Can I see you again?" he asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that touched her deeply. "Of course," she answered, and for the first time in days, she smiled without forcing it. In the weeks that followed, Ryan became a constant and gentle presence in Hannah's life. He appeared to pick her up after classes, brought books he thought she would like, accompanied her on trips to the supermarket, cooked for her when he noticed she was too tired to cook for herself. There was no rush between them, no pressure. It was as if they were rebuilding a friendship before discovering if it could be something more. Ryan respected her boundaries, understood her silences, celebrated her small, everyday joys. One Thursday, he showed up at school with a surprise. He had restored an old oratory, a small and delicate piece he had found abandoned in a storage room at the neighborhood church. Inside, he had placed a small image of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception and a prayer printed in careful calligraphy. "For your classroom," he said, somewhat awkwardly. "I know you're not very religious, but I thought your students might like it." Hannah was moved, not by the religiosity of the object, but by the care, the attention, the time he had dedicated to creating something especially for her. The students, in fact, loved it. They began leaving small thank you notes and requests in the oratory, transforming it into the emotional heart of the classroom. It was during this time that Michael Donovan decided he wasn't finished with her. The first sign was a bouquet of expensive flowers delivered to the school with a card that said, "To the woman who taught me that true nobility cannot be bought. With admiration, MD." The flowers were beautiful, but Hannah gave them to the other teachers. She didn't want that purchased beauty near her. Then came the invitations. Charity dinners, inaugurations, cultural events. Always with the same tone, exclusive, elegant, an opportunity for her to expand her horizons and meet people who could help her project. Hannah refused them all, politely but firmly. That's when Michael changed his strategy. One morning, a representative from the Donovan Foundation arrived at the school with an irresistible offer: a $100,000 sponsorship for the Words That Liberate project, plus a scholarship for Hannah to pursue a master's degree in social education at the best private university in the city, plus the promise to replicate the project in 5 other cities across the country. Hannah was stunned. It was everything she had ever dreamed for the project, multiplied by 10. She could help hundreds of teenagers, transform lives on an industrial scale, become a national reference in social education. But there was a condition, not written but implied. She needed to be present at foundation events, be the face of the project, the story of overcoming that Michael could exhibit whenever he wanted to show the human side of his business. "What do you think?" she asked Ryan that night when she told him about the proposal. They were at her house preparing dinner together, a routine they had naturally developed. Ryan was chopping onions, but stopped when she asked the question. "What do you think?" He returned the question carefully. "I don't know. It's a lot of money, Ryan. It could change everything. It could help so many people. But I don't trust him. I don't trust his intentions. I don't trust what he wants in return. I don't trust what this will do to me." Ryan went back to chopping onions thoughtfully. "Do you know the difference between restoring a piece of art and renovating it?" he asked, seemingly changing the subject. Hannah shook her head, not understanding where he was going with this. "When you restore, you respect the original essence. You clean, you care, you return the beauty that was already there. When you renovate, you change according to your will. You adapt to your taste. You transform into something that better serves your purposes." He stopped cutting and looked at her. "Michael doesn't want to restore you, Han. He wants to renovate, transform you into something that better serves his purposes." Ryan's words echoed in Hannah's mind for days. She knew he was right, but the temptation was enormous. $100,000 meant 2 guaranteed years for the project. It meant being able to help twice as many teenagers. It meant financial security she had never had. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. She called the foundation representative and scheduled a meeting, but not to accept the proposal, to make a counter-proposal. She would accept the sponsorship, but with her own conditions. The money would be administered by her without foundation interference. In pedagogical decisions, she would not be obligated to participate in social events beyond an annual results report, and the project would maintain its original identity without becoming a showcase for the foundation. The answer came the same day. Unacceptable. Michael. Donovan wanted total control, or there would be no deal. That night, Hannah cried, not from sadness, but from relief. She had discovered that her integrity was worth more than $100,000. She had discovered that she wasn't willing to sell herself, even for a noble cause. Ryan found her like that, crying in the kitchen, surrounded by bills to pay and seemingly impossible dreams. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked, her voice choked. He knelt beside her chair and held her hands. "You always do the right thing, Han. Always. That's why I—" He stopped mid-sentence, but she understood. That's why he loved her, had always loved her. Even when they were children, even during all those years apart, even now that she was broken and scared and full of doubts. "Me too," she said softly. "Always too." It was like this, in the simple kitchen of a simple house, among bills to pay and postponed dreams, that they kissed for the first time. It wasn't a movie kiss, it wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was a kiss of recognition, of two hearts that found each other again after a long journey back home. But Michael Donovan was not a man to easily give up. And when he learned that his proposal had been rejected, when he discovered that Hannah had chosen dignified poverty over conditioned wealth, something in him ignited. Wounded, pride was a dangerous thing in a man accustomed to always getting what he wanted, and he had not yet shown what he was truly capable of. The first sign that something was wrong came on a rainy Monday in March. Hannah was in the teacher's lounge, correcting tests when the principal, Mrs. Martha, appeared with a worried expression on her face. The 60-year-old woman, who had directed the school for 2 decades, rarely showed nervousness. But that day, her hands trembled slightly when she held the official envelope she brought in her hands. "Hannah, this arrived for you early this morning," she said, extending the sealed envelope. "It's from the Department of Education." The paper was heavy, official, intimidating. Hannah opened it slowly, feeling a tightness in her stomach that she couldn't explain. It was a formal notification. There was an ongoing investigation into irregularities in the use of public resources and possible distortion of pedagogical objectives related to the Words That Liberate project. She read the document 3 times before she could fully process it. Someone had made an anonymous complaint alleging that she was using the school's name to raise private funds, that she was charging fees from social project students, and that there were signs of religious proselytism in the literacy classes. "This is a lie," she said, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "Mrs. Martha, you know this is a lie." The principal nodded, but her face remained grave. "I know, dear, I've known your work for years, but an investigation is an investigation. Until it's resolved, you'll have to suspend the project and step away from extracurricular activities." The words fell on Hannah like stones. Suspending the project meant abandoning 43 teenagers who depended on those classes, who had found in them a chance for real change. It meant throwing away 2 years of work, of small but significant achievements, of genuine transformations. "For how long?" she asked, although she knew the answer wouldn't be good. "It could take months. You know the bureaucracy. And depending on what the investigation finds," Mrs. Martha didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Depending on what they found or what they planted, Hannah could lose not only the project, but also her job. That afternoon, she left the school in a state of shock. She walked through the neighborhood streets without destination, trying to understand how her life had collapsed so quickly. She didn't need to be a genius to connect the dots. Michael Donovan had promised to help her project. She had refused on his terms, and now a mysterious investigation threatened to destroy everything. It was Ryan who found her, sitting on a bench, in the park where they used to play as children. She was staring into the void, the crumpled envelope in her hands, silent tears running down her face. "Han," he said, sitting beside her. "What happened?" She showed him the document. Ryan read in silence, and she could see the anger growing in his eyes. When he finished, he closed his hands into fists. "It was him," he said, his voice loaded with certainty. "Michael did this." "How? Can you be so sure?" "Because I know him. I've worked for him for 3 years, remember? I've seen him do this before, to other people who dared to say no to him. He has contacts everywhere, especially in the Department of Education. Half of the leadership positions were political appointments he supported." Hannah felt the world spinning around her. The idea that someone could be so cruel, so vindictive, so willing to destroy a lifetime's work out of pure caprice made her nauseous. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small like that of a lost child. Ryan turned to her, held her face between his calloused hands. "You fight. That's what you've always done. That's what you'll always do. And this time, you don't fight alone." That night, Ryan called a lawyer he knew, explained the situation, scheduled a meeting for the next day. Hannah protested that she had no money to pay fees, but he reassured her. The lawyer was Paul, an old colleague who had grown up in the same neighborhood as them and now had a prosperous office downtown. He would take the case pro bono, out of solidarity, but Michael Donovan wasn't finished. 3 days later, while Hannah was trying to organize the project documents to defend herself from the investigation, she received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, cold. Professor Sullivan, this is Marcia, Mr. Michael Donovan's personal assistant. He would like to meet you tonight for a private conversation. It's about the delicate situation you find yourself in. Hannah felt her blood freeze. I have nothing to discuss with Mr. Donovan. I'm sure you'll change your mind when you know he has information that can help you resolve these misunderstandings with the Department of Education. Dinner will be at 8 at Antiquarius Restaurant in the Upper East Side. A table has already been reserved. The call ended before Hannah could respond. She stood with the phone in her hand, her heart beating erratically. The message was clear. Michael had the power to solve the problem he himself had created. It was a show of force and a proposal at the same time. When she told Ryan, he was furious. "You're not going," he said categorically. "It's a trap, Han. He wants you alone, vulnerable, desperate. He'll try to blackmail you, humiliate you, force you to accept his terms." "What if he really can resolve the investigation?" she asked, hating herself for considering the possibility. "What if this is the only way to save the project? At what price?" Ryan stood up, walking around the small living room. "At what price, Hannah? Are you going to sell yourself to him? Are you going to let him possess you just to keep the project running?" The word possess echoed in the air between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to verbalize. "It's not about selling myself," she said, but her voice came out without conviction. "It's about the boys. It's 43 lives, Ryan. 43 futures that depend on these classes. And do you think a future built on blackmail and humiliation will work out? Do you think the boys will be proud to know that their teacher submitted to a scoundrel to keep the project running?" Hannah didn't answer. Not because she didn't have arguments, but because she knew Ryan was right. But the temptation was enormous. The possibility of solving everything with one conversation, of going back on Monday and telling the teenagers that classes would continue, of not disappointing all those people who trusted her. At 7:30 that night, she was getting ready. Ryan appeared at her door when she was finishing applying lipstick. A red lipstick she had bought years ago and never used, saved for a special occasion that never came. Now it seemed the color of war. "Please," he said, when he saw her ready to leave. "Please, don't go." "I need to go," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "I need to at least hear what he has to say." "I'll go with you." "No." "Han." "No, Ryan. This is something I need to do alone." He stood at the doorframe, watching her take her purse, check if she had money for a taxi back, adjust the simple black dress she had chosen. It wasn't a dress of seduction, it was a dress of battle, sober, elegant, untouchable. "If he does anything," Ryan said when she was already on the sidewalk, "anything at all, you call me. I'll be waiting." "I know," she said, and for the first time that night she smiled. "I know you will be." Antiquarius Restaurant was one of those hidden gems of New York City, frequented by the elite who preferred discretion to ostentation. Tables scattered in intimate environments, low light, waiters who knew how to be invisible when necessary. The perfect place for conversations that shouldn't be overheard. Michael was waiting at a table in the most reserved corner, impeccable as always. Dark suit tailored to perfection, perfectly styled hair, that smile that promised everything and guaranteed nothing. When he saw her approaching, he stood up with the automatic courtesy of someone raised to impress. "Hannah," he said, kissing her hand in a way that managed to be respectful and invasive at the same time. "I'm glad you decided to come. I was beginning to fear you would refuse my invitation." "It wasn't an invitation," she said, sitting in the chair he pulled out for her. "It was a summons." Michael laughed, a low and amused sound. "Always so direct. It's one of the things I admire most about you." The dinner that followed was a masterpiece in psychological manipulation. Michael ordered the most expensive wine. On the menu, talked about art, literature, philosophy. He quoted authors she loved, demonstrated knowledge about social education, praised her work with apparent sincerity. At times, he almost managed to make her forget why she was there. But then they arrived at the main subject. "I heard about the delicate situation with the department," he said, cutting the salmon with surgical precision. "What a terrible thing, these anonymous complaints. Sometimes envious people will do anything to destroy beautiful work like yours." Hannah looked him directly in the eyes. "It was you," she said. "It wasn't a question." Michael continued eating, impassive. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you don't intend to spread it around without proof." "I don't need proof. I know it was you." "And if it was?" he asked, putting down his utensils and leaning back in his chair. "And if I say yes, that I made that complaint, what are you going to do about it?" The casual, almost disinterested confession hit her like a punch. She had expected denials, wordplay, half-truths, not this direct and challenging admission. "Why?" was all she could ask. "Because you disrespected me," he answered, his voice still calm, but with a new hardness. "I offered you a unique opportunity, money, prestige, national reach for your project, and you refused it as if it were trash." "I refused because your conditions were humiliating. My conditions were reasonable. I wanted a partnership. I wanted you to be the face of the foundation's social responsibility. I wanted to give you visibility, importance, relevance, and you threw it all away out of foolish pride." Hannah felt anger growing inside her, a clean and just anger. "You wanted to transform me into a showcase. You wanted to exhibit me as a trophy of your generosity. You wanted me to be eternally grateful for your benevolence. And what's wrong with that?" Michael leaned forward, his eyes shining with a dangerous intensity. "You're a public school teacher, Hannah. You live in a poor neighborhood, earn a miserable salary, work with marginals. I offered you the chance to be more than that, to have relevance, to matter." "I already matter," she said, her voice firm despite her trembling hand. "To whom? To half a dozen teenagers with no future? To a school that will be closed in a few years when the government cuts the budget? To a failed boyfriend who works with religious trinkets?" The mention of Ryan made her see red. "Leave Ryan out of this." "Ah, yes, Ryan Matthews, the gardener's son, who now thinks he's an artist." Michael smiled, a cruel smile. "Did you know he was at the party that night? That he saw me humiliate you and did nothing? What kind of man lets the woman he loves be publicly humiliated and stays quiet in the corner? He couldn't do anything. It wasn't his place." "It wasn't his place?" Michael laughed. "Or is he too much of a coward to face someone like me?" Hannah stood up from the chair, her blood boiling. "That's enough. I came here because I thought we could talk like civilized adults. But you're just a small, rich, spoiled man who doesn't know how to handle the word no." "Sit down," Michael said, and there was a cold authority in his voice that made her hesitate. "We haven't finished our conversation." "Yes, we have." "No, we haven't, because you haven't heard my proposal yet." Hannah stood beside the table, torn between running away and hearing what he had to say. Curiosity and desperation won. "What proposal?" "Sit down and I'll tell you." She sat down, but maintained an erect, defensive posture. "I can resolve the investigation," he said, returning to the calm and controlled tone. "One call from me and all this disappears. Your project goes back to operating, you keep your job, your boys continue having classes. Simple as that. And what do you want in return?" Michael smiled, and there was something predatory in that smile. "You. One night. Just one night. You come with me to my penthouse, we spend a few hours together, and the next morning you're free. The investigation disappears, your project continues, you go back to your normal life." The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah felt her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. The proposal was clear, direct, repugnant, and tempting. One night, a few hours. In exchange, 43 teenagers would continue, having a chance at a future. In exchange, 2 years of work wouldn't be thrown away. In exchange, she wouldn't disappoint all the people who trusted her. "You're insane," she said, but her voice came out weak. "I'm being practical. It's a simple business. You have something I want, I have something you need. We make a trade and everyone wins." "And if I refuse?" Michael shrugged, as if it made no difference. "The investigation follows its course. They'll probably find irregularities, even if they have to invent them. You lose the project, probably lose your job too. Your boys go back to the streets. A shame, but life goes on." Hannah stood up again, this time with determination. "Go fuck yourself," she said, using a curse that rarely left her mouth, but which, at that moment, seemed the only adequate response. She left the restaurant without looking back, leaving Michael alone with his sordid proposal and his wounded ego. Only when she reached the sidewalk did she realize she was trembling from head to toe. Ryan was waiting at the door of her house when the taxi arrived. He didn't ask anything, just hugged her and held her until she stopped shaking. "He made a proposal," she said, after telling him everything that had happened at the restaurant. "What kind of proposal?" Ryan asked, although from her tone of voice, he already knew it wouldn't be good. She told him everything, the blackmail, the proposed exchange, the veiled threat. Ryan was silent for a long time after she finished. "You know you can't accept," he finally said. "I know," she replied, "but I also know that if I don't accept, the project ends and 43 lives are affected. And if you accept, your life ends, and mine too." They stood embracing at the door, two scared adults facing a problem that seemed to have no solution. Michael had shown his cards, had revealed how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted. And what he wanted was to break Hannah, possess her, destroy her dignity. It was a war, and in wars there are always casualties. The question was, which ones were they willing to accept? Hannah didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen drinking chamomile, a tea that cooled in the cup, looking at the cell phone that remained silent on the table. Michael had given her 48 hours to decide. The deadline would end on Friday at 8 o'clock, exactly when the Department of Education investigation would issue the preliminary opinion that could definitively bury the words that liberate project. Ryan had offered to stay, but she asked to be alone. She needed to think, and his presence, although comforting, was also a distraction. She couldn't think clearly when he was around, when she smelled the cheap cologne he wore, when she saw his calloused hands holding a coffee cup as if it were something fragile and precious. On Wednesday morning, she arrived at school with deep, dark circles and a knot in her stomach that seemed to have become permanent. The corridors echoed with the frightening normality of routine. Teachers talking about tests, students running not to be late, the smell of reheated coffee coming from the teacher's lounge, as if the world didn't know she was being torn apart. Inside, that's when she saw Charlie standing at her classroom door. Charlie was one of her project students, a 17-year-old boy who had learned to read just 6 months ago. Before that, he had spent 2 years living on the streets of downtown Chicago, surviving as he could, invisible to a society that preferred not to see his existence. Now he was holding a notebook in his hands and had tears in his eyes. "Teacher," he said, his voice choked, "is it true that the classes are going to stop?" Hannah's heart broke a little more. She had tried to keep the investigation secret, but bad news travels fast in small communities. "I don't know yet, Charlie," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm doing everything I can to resolve the situation." "I wrote something." "For you," he said, extending the notebook. "I wanted you to read it in case we can't continue." Hannah opened the notebook and read the words written in still childish handwriting, but loaded with meaning. Teacher Hannah, when I didn't know how to read, the world was a haunted place. The signs on the street were ghosts that threatened me. The papers people gave me were traps I didn't understand. Other people's words were prisons where I was locked up. You taught me that letters aren't enemies. They're friends waiting to tell their stories. Now I read everything. Signs, newspapers, books, even the words inside my heart. If the classes end, I won't forget. I'll keep reading. And if one day I become important, I'll tell everyone it was you who showed me I wasn't stupid. I was just lost. Thank you for finding me. Hannah had to lean against the wall to keep from collapsing. There was the answer to all her dilemmas. No matter what Michael did, no matter how many investigations he invented, no matter if she lost her job or if the official project ended. What really mattered had already happened. She had transformed lives. She had shown Charlie and 42 other teenagers that they had value, that they could learn, that they deserved a better future. No blackmail in the world could erase that. "Charlie," she said, hugging the boy, "thank you. You reminded me of something very important." "What, teacher?" "That what we plant in people's hearts, no one can steal." That afternoon, Hannah made a decision. She wouldn't accept Michael's proposal, but she also wouldn't remain passive, waiting to be destroyed. If he wanted war, he would have war, but she would fight with her own weapons: truth, community, and courage. She called Paul, Ryan's lawyer friend. "Paul, I need help. Not to defend myself from the investigation, but to investigate who's behind it." "Hannah, this could be dangerous. If it's really Michael Donovan, he has resources and contacts that—" "He has money," she interrupted him. "I have righteousness, and sometimes that's enough." Paul was silent for a moment. "What do you want me to do?" "Find out who made the complaint, where the investigation started, what evidence they have, and mainly, if there are other similar cases involving people who went against the interests of the Donovan Foundation." On Thursday morning, Paul called with information that changed everything. "Hannah, you need to come to my office, now. I brought Ryan too. You won't believe what I discovered." An hour later, they were sitting in the simple but organized room of Paul's office, hearing revelations that seemed to come from a movie. "The complaint came from a fake email," Paul began, spreading documents on the table. "But I managed to trace the IP. It originated from the Donovan Foundation office. Additionally, I found at least 5 other cases in the last 3 years. A journalist who was investigating tax irregularities at the foundation, an NGO that refused a partnership proposal, a politician who voted against a project of interest to the family, an artist who publicly criticized Michael in an interview, and a businessman who defeated him in a bid." "And what happened to these people?" Ryan asked, although he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. "They all went through investigations. They all faced professional problems. Some lost jobs, others had reputations destroyed. But here's the interesting part. I managed to contact 3 of them. All reported the same thing. Michael approached them during the crises, offering solutions in exchange for favors." Hannah felt her blood boil. "Favors like?" "It varies. The journalist was pressured to write favorable articles. The politician was blackmailed to change votes. The artist received a proposal similar to yours." "And did she accept?" Paul shook his head. "I couldn't confirm. She moved to another country soon after and didn't want to give details." Ryan stood up, starting to pace around the room. "Is this enough to bring him down?" "Alone, no," Paul admitted. "But if we can get the victims to speak, if we document the pattern of behavior, we can at least publicly expose what he does. And Hannah, there's one more thing." "What?" "Michael isn't the only Donovan. He has a sister, Fiona, who is also a partner in the foundation. And from what I discovered, she doesn't agree with her brother's methods. There are rumors that she's been trying to remove him from management for months. An idea began to form in Hannah's mind. Dangerous, but possible. Do you have her contact? I do, but Hannah, I want to talk to her. Ryan stopped walking and looked at her. Han, this is risky. If she tells Michael, I'm no worse off than I already am. But if she really wants to remove her brother from the foundation's management, maybe I can help her. Fiona Donovan agreed to meet Hannah that same afternoon. They met at a discreet cafe in Brooklyn, away from the curious eyes of New York society. Fiona was an elegant woman in her 40s, gray hair she didn't try to hide, intelligent eyes that evaluated everything around her. So you're the teacher who refused my brother, she said, getting straight to the point as soon as they sat down. That's me, Hannah replied, deciding that honesty was her only option. Good, Fiona smiled. A genuine smile that completely contrasted with her brother's fake smile. It was about time someone did that. You know about the investigation? I know. And I know about the indecent proposal he made. Michael was never subtle with his revenges. Hannah felt a mixture of relief and shame. Relief at not being alone. Shame that her situation was known. Why do you want to help me? Fiona sighed, stirring the coffee she had ordered. Because my brother is destroying everything our father built. The foundation was meant to be a tool for real social transformation, not an instrument of Michael's personal power. He uses our influence to blackmail people, manipulate situations, satisfy his wounded ego. I've had enough. What do you intend to do? For months I've been documenting his irregularities. I have evidence of misuse of resources, of blackmail, of abuse of power. But I need one more thing to permanently remove him from management. What? A victim willing to speak publicly. Someone who has the courage to expose his methods, even knowing he'll try to destroy her. Hannah immediately understood. You want me to be that person? I do, but I'm not asking you to do it for free. If you accept, I guarantee that the investigation against you will be archived tomorrow. More than that, the foundation will sponsor your project for the next 5 years. Without interference, without humiliating conditions, you'll have total autonomy. And Michael. Michael will be removed from management and prohibited from using the family name in any public activity. He will also be forced to compensate all the people he harmed with his revenges. It was a tempting proposal, but Hannah still had doubts. How can I trust you? How do I know this isn't another game from the Donovan family? Fiona opened her purse and took out a sealed envelope. Here are documents that prove everything I said about Michael. If I were lying, I wouldn't be giving you evidence that could destroy our family. Hannah took the envelope but didn't open. What exactly do you need me to do? An interview. You tell your story with details. The journalist is trustworthy, works for one of the country's leading newspapers. The article comes out on Sunday, and on Monday, Michael will be removed. And if he tries to take revenge, he won't be able to. Once the story becomes public, any retaliation from him against you will be seen as confirmation of the article. He'll be neutralized. Hannah looked out the cafe window, watching people pass on the sidewalk. Normal lives without drama, without impossible moral dilemmas. For a moment, she envied that normality. Can I think until tomorrow? Of course, but I need an answer by noon. The article has to be finalized by 6 to come out on Sunday. That night, Hannah told everything to Ryan. They were at her house, having a simple spaghetti dinner that he had prepared, trying to find normality in a completely abnormal situation. What do you think? She asked after telling him about Fiona's proposal. Ryan finished chewing before answering. I think it's risky. I think it could go wrong. I think Michael might find a way to take revenge even after being removed. But I also think you won't have peace until you face this head on, and I think you're strong enough to survive anything that comes after. And if I lose everything, if public exposure destroys my career, my reputation, my life, Ryan stood up, went around the table, and knelt beside her chair. Then we rebuild everything from scratch, together, in another place if necessary. But at least you'll be able to look in the mirror and respect yourself. In the early hours of that morning, Hannah made her decision. On Friday at noon, she called Fiona. I accept. The interview was scheduled for that same afternoon. The journalist, Robert Mendez, was a serious man in his 50s with a career built on investigating cases of corruption and abuse of power. He listened to Hannah's story with professional attention, asking precise questions, requesting details, confirming facts. "Are you sure you want to do this? You want to do?" he asked at the end. "Once the article is published, there's no going back." "I'm sure," she replied, and realized she really was. The article was published Sunday morning with the title, "The Dark Side of Philanthropy: How One of the Country's Largest Foundations Uses Blackmail and Humiliation as Tools of Power." Hannah's photo was on the front page, along with a summary of the story that shocked the country. Michael tried to counter with an official note denying everything, but it was too late. Other victims began to appear, telling similar stories. The press became interested in the case. Official investigations were opened. The public prosecutor's office got involved. On Monday, Michael Donovan was removed from the foundation's management by unanimous decision of the board of directors. On Tuesday, the investigation against Hannah was officially archived. On Wednesday, she received a call from Fiona announcing that the sponsorship for the project had been approved. But the victory came at a cost. Hannah received hundreds of messages, most in support, but some of hatred. People who believed in Michael, who thought she was an opportunist trying to promote herself at the expense of a respected family. Her photos circulated on social media, her life was publicly dissected, reporters appeared at the school where she worked. For 2 weeks, she was the talk of the town. Then, as happens with all news, other things caught the public's attention, and she returned to anonymity. Michael disappeared from public life. Rumors said he had moved abroad. Others said he was preparing a comeback. Hannah tried not to think about it. What mattered was that the Words That Liberate project had not only survived but prospered. With the foundation's sponsorship, she was able to expand the classes, hire more teachers, reach more teenagers. Charlie became a monitor, helping other boys discover the magic of reading. 6 months after the interview, on a Thursday afternoon, Hannah was at school preparing material for the evening class when Ryan appeared at the classroom door with a box in his hands. "What is that?" she asked, curious. "A gift," he said, awkwardly. "Actually, it's something of yours that I've kept all these years." Hannah opened the box and found a pile of papers, yellowed by time. They were letters she had written in her adolescence, but never sent. Letters to distant friends, to deceased relatives, to the future, to herself, and in the middle of them all, a letter addressed to Ryan, "When we're adults." "You kept all this." "I did. You gave them to me when we were kids, said it was for me to open when you became a real teacher. I think the time has come." With trembling hands, Hannah opened the letter she had written at 15. "Hi, future Ryan. If you're reading this, it means I've managed to become a teacher as I always dreamed. I hope you've also managed to achieve your dreams, whatever they may be. I hope we're still friends, even after so much time. I hope you still remember me with affection, as I will always remember you. You've always been my best friend, even when you didn't know it. You've always protected me, always believed in me, always made me feel special. If when we're adults you still feel something, for me, I want you to know that I feel it too. I always have. Since we were children running through the streets, since the afternoons at the bakery, since the dreams we shared sitting on the school wall. I love you, Ryan. I always have. And if life brings us back to each other, I want you to know that you've always been my first choice, my first love, my first certainty that there is goodness in the world. With love, 15-year-old Hannah. When she finished reading, there were tears in both their eyes. I always knew, Ryan said softly. I always knew you were my first choice too. They kissed right there in the empty classroom, surrounded by books and realized dreams, by letters from the past and promises of the future. 6 months later, they married in a simple ceremony in Hannah's backyard. There was no designer dress or party hall. There was true love, real friends, genuine joy. Charlie was the best man, carrying the rings with the pride of someone who had learned that each small responsibility is a great achievement. Michael Donovan didn't show up. He probably didn't even know about the ceremony, and that was fine with everyone involved. Hannah had learned that true victory wasn't defeating enemies, but building a life so full that they became irrelevant. She had learned that true love doesn't need to conquer anything. It just resists, persists, and when it finds the right moment, it flourishes. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled, not because she had won a battle, but because she had discovered it was worth fighting for who she really was. The Words That Liberate project continues operating to this day. There are now more than 200 transformed teenagers, 200 lives that discovered they weren't stupid. They were just lost, waiting for someone to believe in them. And Hannah and Ryan remained together, building a simple but meaningful life, proving that sometimes happy endings don't come with fanfare or public recognition. They come with shared breakfasts, hands intertwined on the way to work, and the silent certainty that they chose right. Because in the end, the only victory that really matters is